I haven't eaten anything in 42 days. But my refrigerator keeps emptying out every night. I work the night shift at a large public hospital, drawing blood, labeling vials, filing paperwork. Nothing remarkable about the job itself. But 2 years of accumulated stress had quietly added nearly 20 kilograms to my frame before I even noticed. My doctor prescribed a weekly injection, a medication that suppresses hunger by convincing the brain the stomach is always full. It worked. Almost immediately. Within the first week, the smell of food made me nauseous. My clothes started loosening. The mirror began showing angles of my own face I had never seen before, sharp cheek bones, hollowed eyes. I thought everything was moving in the right direction. Then the milk carton happened. I bought a full gallon of whole milk on a Tuesday morning after my shift. I live alone on the 4th floor of an old building, the kind where the floorboards creak under every footstep and the walls are thin enough to hear the rain hitting the roof, one drop at a time. Thursday evening, before heading to work, I opened the refrigerator to grab a bottle of water. The carton was completely empty, sitting neatly on the middle shelf, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the night shifts had blurred the days into one long, unbroken smear of time. I threw the carton away and went to work, trying to ignore the cold feeling crawling slowly up my spine. 2 days later, it was 3 pounds of ground beef. I had bought it with the intention of meal prepping for the week, even though I had no appetite for anything. The sealed package was sitting on the lowest shelf of the refrigerator. When I woke up at 4 p.m. the following afternoon, the plastic wrap had been torn open, not peeled back carefully but torn, the edges warped and jagged like an open wound. The styrofoam tray was completely clean. Not a drop of blood, not a single scrap of meat. I stood in the middle of my kitchen for 20 minutes, letting the silence of the apartment press against my ears. I checked the front door. The deadbolt was locked. The safety chain was engaged. The only kitchen window looking straight down into the alley 4 floors below was locked tight, the layer of city grime along the frame completely undisturbed. No signs of forced entry. No signs of pests. Rats do not consume 3 pounds of raw meat and leave no trace behind. Only 2 possibilities remained. Someone was inside my apartment, or the far more terrifying alternative, I was doing this myself in my sleep, and I had no memory of any of it. I decided to find out. Before leaving for my shift that night, I placed a brand new jar of peanut butter on the kitchen counter. I dusted the surrounding surface with a thin, nearly invisible layer of flour. Then I opened my laptop, angled the webcam toward the kitchen, and left it recording through the night. I couldn't concentrate during my shift. Every time I watched blood rise into a collection vial, that deep red filling the tube, my mind drifted back to the clean styrofoam tray sitting in my refrigerator. When I got home just before dawn, everything appeared normal. The locks were untouched. The air inside the apartment was heavy and stale, exactly as I had left it. I walked into the kitchen. The peanut butter jar was still there, but it was completely empty, the glass so spotless, it looked like it had just come out of a dishwasher. I looked down at the flour on the counter. No footprints, but the flour had been disturbed, swept into wide sweeping arcs, as if something large and smooth had dragged itself slowly across the surface. My hands were trembling when I reached for the laptop. I dragged the cursor through 8 hours of footage. The first 5 hours showed nothing. just the dark, silent kitchen. At 3:14 a.m. the screen jolted. A heavy wave of static rolled across the image, breaking the pixels apart. When the picture came back, the kitchen was no longer empty. A figure was standing beside the counter. It was wearing my slip clothes. Its build looked like mine, but the proportions were wrong in ways my brain couldn't immediately process, like looking at a photograph you know has been altered but can't identify exactly where. It didn't work. It glided, its limbs hanging loose and disconnected, as though the bones inside had been replaced with something heavy and without fixed shape. It moved toward the peanut butter jar. It didn't use its hands to unscrew the lid. It lowered its head, its jaw separating from its normal position, and closed its mouth around the entire glass jar. The muscles along its throat contracted in hard, irregular spasms. The jar was pulled back out completely clean. Then it turned and looked directly into the camera. The eyes on my face were not my eyes. They were entirely white, no pupils, no iris, is glowing with a faint and milky luminescence in the dark. And it was smiling, using my mouth, stretched open in a way that the muscles of a human face cannot physically produce. I slammed the laptop shut. The casing cracked under my hands. Then I understood. The medication had suppressed the hunger signal in my brain. But hunger is a primal force. It does not simply disappear. If the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge it, the body will find another way to feed itself. The drug had not cured my hunger. It had only severed my awareness from it, creating a separate, starving presence that took control of my body while I slept. I have not slept in 3 days. I sit in the corner of my living room, holding a heavy metal flashlight, watching the kitchen in the dark. I am so tired my bones ache. The edges of my vision blur and pulse with dark, floating shapes. The peanut butter is gone. The meat is gone. I am afraid to sleep because I know that if I close my eyes when I wake up fully, the thing controlling my body will not be me, and I don't know what it will decide to eat next. I lost 8 kilograms in 3 weeks. But what was disappearing wasn't fat. It was me. I work in the basement of the State Library, 10 hours a day, surrounded by decaying documents and dust, completely cut off from natural light. That isolation bred depression. The depression bred something else. After 2 years, I no longer recognized myself in the mirror, and I don't mean that figuratively. I found a private clinic in the basement of a high-end commercial building downtown. Frosted glass, white noise, receptionists who spoke in hushed whispers as though they were inside a church. I paid $6,000 for a 3-month course of their proprietary injectable, a weight loss treatment they promised would reset my metabolism and help me reclaim my true form. I read that phrase back to myself now and feel cold all over. Every Sunday evening, 1 injection into the abdomen. The liquid in the pen wasn't clear like standard medications. It had a strange iridescent sheen like oil spreading across dark water. The moment I administered the first dose, a sharp metallic taste flooded the back of my throat, followed by an intense radiating cold spreading outward from the injection site through my entire body. By the 3rd week, I had lost 8 kilograms. My clothes hung off me like fabric draped over bones. The features of my face sharpened into angles that felt foreign and aggressive. But the physical change were not what frightened me most. It was what was happening on the inside. The hunger disappeared completely. But so did everything else. I stopped feeling joy. I stopped feeling sadness. The depression that had haunted me for years didn't lift. It solidified into a massive, impenetrable block of indifference. I would sit at my desk for hours staring at a single historical document, my mind entirely empty, a static void where my thoughts used to live. Then the mirrors started. The first time I almost dismissed it entirely. I was brushing my teeth in my small bath room, the fluorescent light overhead flickering. I leaned over the sink spat and straightened up to look at my reflection. I had already stopped moving, but the woman in the mirror continued the motion for a fraction of a second longer. The toothbrush fell from my fingers and clattered into the porcelain bowl. I stood very still and stared. The reflection stared back. It was me, the pale skin, the hollow pale blue eyes, the oversized beige turtleneck. But the posture was wrong. I was standing rigid, my shoulders tense and pulled back. The reflection was slightly slouched, both arms hanging heavily at its sides. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, the reflection had cinched back up. I turned off the light and practically ran to my bedroom, pulling the dovet over my head. 2 days later, at the library, I was walking down aisle up, a neglected section housing 19th century census records that almost no one ever visited. The motion sensor lights at the far end of the aisle had been broken for months, leaving the space draped in deep, heavy shadow. In the darkness, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the dark glass of a display case. I was walking forward. The reflection was standing perfectly still, watching me walk away. I stopped. The reflection did not stop with me. It remained frozen in place, its pale blue eyes fixed on the spot where I had been standing a moment before. "Hello," I whispered. My voice trembled, a small and pathetic sound inside that vast, silent room. The reflection turned its head toward me, slowly. So slowly, I questioned whether I was imagining it. Its face was completely blank, a mask of pale, lifeless skin. Then it smiled. Not a human smile. The corners of its mouth pulled back to far revealing teeth that were slightly too pointed, slightly too long. I turned and ran. The stack of files in my arms hit the concrete floor like a wave breaking. I went home and locked every door. I pulled the curtains shut. I covered the bathroom mirror with a thick towel. I taped newspaper across the windows. I sat in the middle of my living room in the dark and forced myself to think. Then I understood. Energy is never destroyed. It only transfers. The medication wasn't eliminating the mass I was losing. It was moving it somewhere else, to the other side of the glass. And whatever was on that side was growing, feeding on everything I was shedding, gaining independence, gaining consciousness. The less I became, the more it became. Sunday night, my alarm went off. Time for the next injection. I walked into the bathroom. My hands were shaking. I pulled the towel down from the mirror. I was not in the mirror anymore. The bathroom behind the glass was empty, just white tiles and the flickering light reflecting into nothing. I looked down at my own hands. They were slightly transparent. Through the skin of my own fingers, I could faintly see the outline of the sink beneath them. Then I heard footsteps from the living room, slow and deliberate, carrying weight, making the floorboards creak in exactly the way they creak under my feet. Someone was in my apartment. Someone wearing my oversized beige turtleneck. Someone with my pale blue eyes. I am sitting on the cold bathroom tiles, holding the unused injection pen in both hands. The door handle is slowly turning. The medication did not make me lose weight. It made me lose my place in the physical world. And whatever is standing on the other side of that door has come to claim its empty apartment. The drug worked. I lost 30 pounds in 2 weeks. I also lost 6 hours of my day, and I have no memory of what my body did with them. I want to be clear about something before I start, because the way this story sounds is not the way it happened, and the distance between those two things is important to me. I am not a person who buys unregulated substance, is off encrypted forums. I am a 34-year-old data analyst who works remotely, pays his taxes, and keeps a color-coded spreadsheet for his grocery budget. I am careful, methodical, and deeply boring by choice. But I have a severe metabolic disorder that my insurance decided after 3 years of covering treatment no longer qualified for benefits. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had lost 12 pounds of water weight and could feel my joints beginning to protest in the specific way they had before the medication had started working. I want you to understand the arithmetic of desperation before you judge the decision I made, because it matters for understanding how a careful, methodical, deeply boring person ends up injecting something called Protocol 7 int. His thigh at 2 in the morning in a cramped apartment in a city where it never stops raining. The supplier on the forum went by Synthetica. No profile picture, minimal post history, a reputation built entirely on a thread of testimonials from people whose usernames I didn't recognize describing results I wanted badly enough to override my better judgment. The vials arrived in an unmarked padded envelope with a hand-written label and no ingredient list, which I noted and filed away in the part of my mind where I was storing all the things I was choosing not to think about too carefully. The liquid was black, not dark brown, not very dark blue, black, opaque, with a slight viscosity that made it move slowly when I tilted the vial. It looked like something that should not be injected into a human body, which is information my brain registered and which my hand ignored when I drew it into the syringe, because the alternative was watching my health deteriorate for the 3rd time in 4 years, and I had simply run out of patience for that particular experience. The heat was immediate, a wave of it moving outward from the injection site and through my entire body in under 10 seconds, followed by something I did not expect and cannot adequately describe except to say it was a sound that wasn't a sound, a vibration that existed inside my skull rather than in the room, low and dense and layered, like standing near industrial machinery, or like a frequency that sits just at the edge of what hearing can process. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a while and breathed through it and told myself it was a normal pharmaceutical response and that it would pass, and eventually the heat faded, but the sound didn't. It was still there when I went to bed. It was still there when I woke up. After 3 days, I had stopped expecting it to stop. The physical results were by any measure extraordinary. 25 pounds in 10 days, my body processing stored fat with an efficiency that my scale registered and my mirror confirmed, and my rational mind struggled to contextualize as anything other than deeply unusual. I felt lighter. I also felt like I was thinking through. Caused the humming a constant interference layer between my thoughts and their destinations, making concentration difficult, and sleep something I visited briefly rather than inhabited. I told myself this was manageable. I was losing weight at a rate I had never achieved through any legitimate means. I told myself a lot of things during those first 2 weeks that I have since stopped telling myself. The humming changed around day 12. Not louder, exactly more structured. The undifferentiated noise began to have texture, almost like voices heard through a wall in an adjacent room, muffled for words but with the unmistakable rhythm and emotional weight of language. I couldn't make out anything specific. What I could perceive were feelings attached to the sounds, not my feelings, which is the part that took me the longest to accept as something other than a symptom of sleep deprivation. Emotions with textures I didn't recognize in combinations. I didn't have personal context for a very specific quality of fear that wasn't mine. A hunger that was cold and mathematical rather than physical. A grief so heavy it felt geological. They moved through my head like weather fronts passing through, and leaving me standing in their wake trying to figure out where they had come from and where they had gone. The missing time started in the 3rd week. I would sit at my desk at 9 in the morning blink, and find the room dark and the clock reading 11 at night. Not gradual, instantaneous the way a corrupted file jumps from one frame to another with nothing in between. What concerned me more than the gaps themselves was what the gaps contained. My apartment during these periods was being cleaned with a thoroughness and organizational precision that bore no relationship to my normal habits. Surfaces I hadn't touched in months were immaculate. Items had been rearranged according to a logic I couldn't reverse engineer. Once I found equations written across my bathroom mirror in dry erase marker, long, dense strings of notation in a branch of mathematics I had studied briefly in university and retained almost nothing of. I photographed them before wiping them off and sent them to a former professor, told me they were related to network topology and signal propagation modeling, and asked where I had encountered them. I told him I'd seen them online. I didn't tell him they were in my own handwriting. I want to describe the pharmacy encounter carefully because it is the part of this that I have revisited it most often, and the part I am most aware of sounding unhinged when I recount. It was past midnight, the store nearly empty. I was in the first aid aisle trying to focus through the constant interference in my head when a woman came around the corner at the far end and stopped and looked at me. That's all she did. She stopped and she looked at me, a pale woman in a beige sweater with the particular exhaustion in her face that I had been seeing in my own mirror for 3 weeks, the dark circles, the translucent quality of someone who hasn't been slipping inside their own sleep. The moment we made eye contact, the humming in my head changed. It didn't get louder. It got organized the way a crowd becomes a chant, the way static resolves into a signal. I felt it as a physical sensation in the center of my head, a sudden coherence, like a frequency locking in. She didn't speak. Her mouth didn't move. But I heard something, and I am aware of how that sentence sounds, and I am going to write it anyway because it is what happened. It was a voice that wasn't auditory. It was the same quality as the emotional impressions I had been experiencing for weeks, but sharp and specific in language, with the metallic flat affect of a system notification rather than a person speaking. 2 phrases. The first identified me by a designation I had never been given and did not recognize. The second described a percentage and used word I have not been able to stop thinking about since. She raised her hand slowly and pointed at me, and the sound in my head peaked and I left. I abandoned the bandages on the floor and walked very fast through the automatic doors into the rain and kept walking until I was back in my apartment with the dead bolt turned. I destroyed the remaining vials that night. smashed them in the sink, and watched the black liquid spiral down the drain, and stood there for a while with my hands on the porcelain and my forehead against the cabinet above it, and breathed. I felt briefly like someone who had made a decision and executed it, and was now on the other side of it. That feeling lasted about 4 hours, which is when I woke up standing at my front door with my hand on the knob, and no memory of getting up. I have been trying to understand what Protocol 7 actually is for 6 weeks now. The forum where I found Synthetica is gone. The testimonials, the thread, the username, all of it, removed with the kind of completeness that doesn't happen by accident. What I have been able to piece together from the equations on my mirror, from the research I've done in the hours when I'm confident I'm the one doing the researching, is that the compound appears to function as some kind of biological signal receiver, something that creates or enhance is a particular kind of connectivity between nervous systems in proximity to one another. I don't know if that's what it was designed to do or if that's a side effect of something else. I don't know who designed it or why or how many people received the same envelope I did. I don't know if the weight loss is the point or the mechanism or simply a byproduct of something being consumed that isn't fat. The humming is different now than it was 6 weeks ago. It is not chaotic anymore. It has the quality of something that has reached a stable configuration, thousands of individual signals resolved into a single coherent frequency, and within it, I can feel the shape of other minds the way you can feel the presence of other people in a dark room without seeing them. I do not know how many. I do not know where they are. I know that when I am near certain people, the signal strengthens, and I know that the equations on my mirror have appeared twice more since I destroyed the vials, and I know that there are hours in my day that I cannot account for and tasks completed during them that I did not consciously initiate. I am writing this during a period of clarity. I have learned to recognize them by the quality of the silence, a relative silence, not absence of the hum, but a moment where my own thoughts are louder than what is coming in from outside. I don't know how long this one will last. I am writing quickly. The thing I most want you to understand, if you are reading this as someone who is considering purchasing something from an unregulated source, because you are desperate and out of legitimate options, and the arithmetic of your situation has started to override your better judgment, which I understand, which I do not judge, which I lived inside for long enough to make the choice I made, is that desperation is a specific kind of blindness, and the people who design things for desperate people to find know exactly how that blindness works and build their products accordingly. I don't know what I agreed to when I drew that black liquid into a syringe and pressed the plunger down. I don't know what I am becoming or whether the direction of travel is reversible. I know that my hand reaches for the door sometimes without my permission, and that the frequency in my head has the quality of patience, like something that has done this before, and knows exactly how it ends and is simply waiting for the process to complete. I am going to finish writing this and send it before the clarity window closes. If it reads like the account of someone who has lost perspective on their own experience, I understand that. I have considered that possibility more carefully and more often than you might expect. But I also know what my own handwriting looks like, and I know what I found on my bath mirror, and I know that I was standing at my front door at 4 in the morning with my coat already on and my keys already in my hand, and I know that I had not put them there. The door is right there. It has been right there all morning. I am going to stay on this side of it for as long as I can.